Well, good afternoon, Scott Baker. We've got a fun one today.
Would the fun part of that be defined by the phrase thumb on the scale?
No, I think what I would define as fun is something that was somewhat novel to me before I came to our content and what we do and how we talk about it. This idea of organizational decision making and what admired leaders kind of brought to it, and the process that we kind of explained to us at one of our recent firm meetings. It's kind of touched on in here, but it's not fully spelled out. It's almost like we need a little bit of a primer before we get into why this is valuable.
Yeah. Well, the title of the field note, so Lead Better, we talk about the day's field note from Admired Leadership for people that like to talk about this stuff like we do. So the title is, who is the right person to make the decision? So we're obviously always told, like, it's like almost like a trope, that leaders need to learn to delegate. And so it's like, do I need to make that decision? I guess I don't. Let me delegate it to somebody else. And then I've now just handed it all over, and then it magically, maybe they weren't quite ready, but I just go, wow, this is the process. It's a little more complex than that in terms of, well, who do you pick to make the decision, and what are you looking for, and how does that all work out?
And that might be a strange concept to some, because another trope in leadership, we heard out of the mouth of former president, I am the decider. I'm the, right? And, that's something that was...
Wait, was
George
that?
That was George W. Bush.
Yeah, right. Okay, right.
So, and he was saying it in such a way, I don't know if he was at the time defending that he was the one who actually is in charge. And he was trying to...
I got confused briefly with Alexander Haig after Reagan got shot, but nobody remembers that. Yeah.
Right. No, nobody on this call anyway. But this notion that the leader is the decider, and that this whole idea of where the buck actually stops means that I'm going to be the one, if I'm the leader, who's actually making this decision. So this is complicated with a couple of other things. That we have, like, organizational pressure has really moved over the last couple of decades to the idea that we don't want a single person in a top-down way making decisions for everyone and just sending commands out. That this idea of consensus building around leadership is an important idea that has emerged. And I think it's important for the best, right? That if you don't have buy-in, if you don't have subscription to the idea of it doesn't matter if it's the best decision if people haven't subscribed to the idea that it is the best decision. So consensus building should be about this idea of subscription building. And getting as many people bought in as possible. The problem it creates, if you don't know how to build consensus properly, and if you don't know how it fits into decision making, is it has a tendency to just be conversation after conversation after conversation with no actual decision being made. And it turns a lot of people off from the idea of consensus building, because many people are just people of action. We want to... What's the decision? Let me just move on.
Let's get this over with. Yeah.
And so there's some real issues with the idea of how do we blend this idea that there are some real advantages in consensus decision making, along with the idea that we want to actually make progress in our organizations. There's a couple ways that people even slow roll the whole process, right?
Yeah. Well, there isn't the question here. I mean, we have a lot of behaviors and things around the idea of how the leader builds consensus. But here, when you're talking about who you're handing it off to, they have to fully understand that as well. Yes. That seems to be the crux here.
Right. And so the way that we've had it explained to us, and the way that we recommend to many other people who are asking this specific question. And by the way, this is not all decisions, right?
Sure.
Yes, consensus building should be part of a lot of decisions, but there are those very important decisions where you've got 7 VPs in the room and maybe all of them have a different way. Maybe there's an up or down kind of decision that needs to be made. Maybe there's a third option on the table as well, but this very important decision is the type of thing that maybe only happens once a year in the organization,
right.
this kind of choice. And when you're faced with those decisions, there's going to be a lot of talking. There's going to be a lot of debate. There's going to be, is there a target on the table that says, this is actually what we're working for? So how do you get to the point where you have a target? Once you have a target, are you building consensus around hitting that target? And then when we finally get to this field note, who is it that actually makes the decision?
Yeah.
And many times you might decide the leader is not the person who is the decision maker.
Right.
That's a completely separate role. And I haven't gone through all the details of how to all do it. Some of that is behind our paywall, right? In my leadership behaviors that we've got in our platform. But this notion of this is what the decision maker is in the decision-making process. There's a few things that we haven't really explained in this field note that gets us to the point of like, oh, this is a role in the decision-making process.
I don't even know that we need to get that far into what the actual process of doing that would be, because right away, and a lot of times when we're doing admired leadership behaviors or field note insights, we're kind of saying, well, what do we know already? Like if you said to everybody, well, what would be a good way of picking somebody? You would talk about, well, do they have a level of expertise? Have you given them the resources? Do they have a track record as a good decision maker? And but what happens there is that leaders sometimes, when they're selecting people or leaning on them to make decisions, they actually overplay. They lean too hard into this role of expertise. So this is actually a real sort of slap in the face about, like, our gut says go with the person that has the expertise, but the field note is underlying a couple of stages of the selection of this person that would kind of fight a lot of the conventional thinking around the things that I just outlined, including this very first part, because it's not so much the expertise. And in fact, expertise around it can be the thing that bogs down this person. So we're not talking about the role of how they're building consensus. It's just that they themselves. The second part, we'll get a little bit into that. But when we know that we have this problem, we talk about it all the time, the curse of knowledge or whatever you want to call it, the expertise is a factor, but sometimes the expert is either, well, they're tasked with a lot of things they're expert in. You really need somebody who has the capacity to go through the process of the decision, which might be a different person. They need to have a facility or be able to look and point to the people who have expertise, but their expertise is around the capacity of having the ability to make the decision.
Right. Okay. So let's make this a little more practical, if we could, with an analog. Let's say we have a family of 6 and we're all going on a family vacation.
Okay.
And we need to decide. So 7 months in advance, we're going to be deciding where we're going for our next summer vacation together. Right. So we've got a lot of different opinions. Some people really love the beach. Some people hate the beach. I mean, really hate the beach. Some people have never been to an amusement park before. And so they've got a very strong other
because they're cruel parents.
Have been to so many amusement parks, they never want to see another one. Right. And so, but you also don't want a miserable trip. And so even those who don't get their way, you want them to have subscription to the process, right? You want them to be able to participate. So this role of decision maker, right? Who is it? You've got a mom and a dad. You've got maybe older brother, younger brother, older sister, younger sister. You've got these 6 people. Throw in a grandma for good cause there, and there's your 7 people who are making this decision. There's going to be debate. There's going to be presentations. There's going to, depending on how it's handled, right? And so, and then you've got this idea of like, well, let's just talk for a minute about what the target is. We're going to talk a little bit about, let's just say we go to the beach. We haven't decided that we're going to the beach. Let's just say that we're going to the beach. Now, the whole reason that you have the decision maker is if you know you're definitely going on your vacation, but we definitely need 3 months to actually plan the logistics of it. So if we get to the point where we're 3 months away and we still haven't made the decision, one of the 7 of us needs to be the decision maker, right? It doesn't always have to be dad. It doesn't always have to be mom, right?
Now
so
one thing,
how
just
do you
make sure I
decide?
understand here. we would talk about because one of the main themes in this field note is that person has to have the capacity to make the decision. That doesn't mean that they have to necessarily be the person implementing the logistics. They just have to have the capacity to kind of go through all of the factors that come around the decision, not necessarily implementing it. And then secondarily, they just have to be the person that can see the ripple effects. So when you're the leader, the focus of the field note being, how do you decide who the decision maker is? It's, does this person have the capacity to kind of think through not only what all the members of the family are engaging with, but then the second and third order consequences, the ripple effects of that decision. So, and then we'll get to the third step in it.
Yeah. And so I love the fact that there's roles here. And I know that we're talking about this as a simple kind of analog, but I think if you actually did this with your family, it would be fantastic. Like, because you would rotate the role of who the decision maker is. And sometimes when you're thinking to yourself, well, who is the best of grandma, mom, dad, older brother, younger brother, who is the best person? And it's mentioned here, like sometimes if this is an organizational thing, the team that is most affected by the decision, like there's more like real impact going into your organizational team as opposed to some other vice president on the other side of the aisle who needs to be subscribed, but really their team isn't going to be affected. This one team should be the people who are actually the decision makers. And oftentimes you don't want to turn the decision over to the decision maker. Most of the time you actually don't. Most of the time, this is a way to force consensus to come to a real resolution. But if we can't force consensus, force all of our opinions into a consensus of this is what we all want, then that's the time where the decision maker actually gets, you're actually hoping that the decision maker doesn't actually have to come into play as a role for the group but you're just using them as this, like, at some point we might actually have to, right? So as a dad, I might say the youngest kid is going to be the decision maker. Well, that might be a really bad choice because the youngest kid is the one who hasn't been to the amusement park yet, right? And they've got, less awareness of what's going on for the good of the whole family. They're just going to say amusement park, right? And so if dad kind of wants to go to amusement park as well and decides, I'm going to delegate the decision maker role to the youngest kid, you're already predetermining what the decision is. So you have to be careful organizationally who it is that you hand it off to.
Yeah, true. Although the sort of the conclusion of the field note is this thumb on the scale, which is the leader actually should not be selecting somebody who the leader is going to be out of alignment with. It's not that the leader is dictating the decision, but they really are leaning in a particular direction. So that you are, now again, if the person hadn't been to a particular thing or didn't have that expertise, that might not be disqualifying. And maybe the youngest wants to go to the amusement park. So when you're saying, does this person that I'm selecting, and because the skill of the field note is not so much how is this person, what's the outcome of the process that they go through to make the decision. It's the leader's decision on an ongoing basis. How do I say, let me get to the person who's got the bandwidth, the capacity to go through this process, that has at least some of the cognitive ability to look at those second and third order ripple effects. And I also feel like is at least in my worldview, right? So that we're not too far afield, because I, as the leader, if you're ending up and we're on different planets, you're going to just sense the tension, and it's not going to serve anyone well. Now, I kind of thought that would be where we would see comments, and I think there was one comment that kind of pointed in that direction, which is, well, if you're delegating, aren't you being a micromanager if you're coming back in and trying to say, well, I kind of wanted a person that was going to be in my, my sort of, realm of thinking. But the practical matter is that you are delegating a process, but you do want to have some synchronization with where the leader themselves is. So that leader to decision maker, that there's some predictability in that.
Yes. And there's oftentimes, and we've had these discussions organizationally, where sometimes the leader does elect to be the decision maker. Sometimes they do.
Yeah. But, and if there is a particular sort of scenario where they have that it lines up, but you're also we're talking about leaders always trying to develop the capacity in other people, but sometimes a lot's at stake. and you might think, we're joking around about, the decider and Alexander Haig saying I'm in charge here, but you can look back at even like before even I was born. What happened at the Bay of Pigs? What happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Well, in that first one, JFK is leaning on the experts, right? And things did not go very well in that process. Whereas in the Cuban Missile Crisis, he made a deliberate choice to look for a different set of deciders around him that weren't encumbered by some of the things that went awry in the first set. That's actually the thing that you're looking for, is can you become the person that says, hey, I picked the wrong person or persons on this one, and now I know why. Can I, with some predictability, I'm not going to get 10 out of 10, but instead of getting 3 out of 10, can I get to 6 out of 10 or 8 out of 10?
Yes.
Great.
Which is important organizationally, that you don't set up the decision maker. The first time you do this, you don't set up the decision maker as the all-time decision maker. That you state it clearly. This is a role that's going to rotate.
And in these, this is not a matter of necessarily thinking about like, well, can I just hand it off? I'm using the 6-year-old analogy. It's not like you're going to say, well, we're going to get the junior person on the team to make the decision. No, you're making a wise decision about who in the whole organization or whole family, whatever that is the best person to make this decision. And counterintuitively, it's not necessarily the person who has the most expertise.
Right. And so I know that we're overtime. We're overtime here for a minute. We usually only go 15 minutes, but like, why not the expert? Right. And the person with the most expertise is the default for a lot of leaders on purpose. What's the main reason we step away from that? Why not?
Well, that was the thing, which is because of that either curse of knowledge, but also the experts get so into the fine details of it that they just get bogged down. They become the person that just can't actually get to the decision because, well, they see this and this and this and this and this. I'm a little bit that way, right? I like to go in and be like, well, I can see all 32 choices, and I'm going to look and vet every one of them, and I'm going to check, all of the reviews around this, and eventually I can come to a pretty good decision, but that would drive most people crazy. So a lot of times you just want to, and many times, and maybe some of you do this too, you end up being like, I should have just bought the first thing I looked at. Like I just put myself through a whole hassle of a problem. Well, that plays itself out in organizational decision-making all the time. So sometimes the person that does have the deepest expertise is going to get too bogged down in the fine points of the things that drew them into the expertise that make them so enamored of that topic or subject in the first place. We love them for that. And sometimes they might be the decision maker, but a lot of times they're not.
Right. Okay. Love it. Thanks very much for this conversation. We'll do this again tomorrow. All right. Bye now.